in the rally in order to get them out to the picket, right? So I went to the local post office union meeting. You know, the first thing we do is stand up and give a pledge of allegiance to the flag, right? But then, you know, I talked about the rally, and after a long process of talking to Washington and, you know, back and forth, they never really endorsed a rally before, so they didn't know how to do it. But they eventually did endorse it. So what that means is that they're going to publicize this to all the members of the postal unions in Vermont. This is a rally, one to stop the cuts at the post office. But the other thing is it's also a teach-in that we're calling making trouble for the 1%, which is basically on how we want to make it about how rank and file activism within the unions is a necessary component that we need to link up with the Occupy movement for new strategies and tactics to preserve, protect public sector unions. So, you know, we make a compromise in the sense we don't raise all these issues with the leadership of the union right off, but we want to have this discussion with the membership. So I think that's a modest example of a united front approach.
Rodney? Actually, I wanted to comment on a different example, but I think along the same lines. You know, there's a website called the World Socialist website. I'm not sure what organization runs it, but there was an article on there around the time of the Wisconsin protests criticizing the ISO for being involved in those protests. First of all, I can't imagine not wanting to go to those protests. And I couldn't, and I wish I had. But second of all, I mean, if that organization is so sectarian that they won't go to where the working class is at, it's impossible to spread your ideas there, impossible to build your organization. And furthermore, it makes it impossible to push those struggles in give them another option. You know, this sort of like the Million Woman March as well. Giving an alternative to saying go out and vote, or in this case, giving an alternative to the Recall Walker campaign. And from comrades that were there, it sounds like there was people talking about a general strike. There was people talking about continuing the occupation of the Capitol building. And maybe this goes to answer the comrade's question about if somebody agrees with you, why should they join your organization? But it also, from what people tell me, if there had been more people, more ISO members, more other, left allies, like maybe whatever party runs that World Socialist website, there, and actually not being sectarian and getting involved and saying, let's call a general strike, it would have certainly, presented a bigger, better option than Recall Walker, which channels everything back to the Democrats. And for more discussion on this, I also recommend, if anyone hasn't read Left-Wing Communism, Lenin talks a lot about being involved in relatively conservative organizations and the importance of that.
We are starting to get closer to the end of the time for our discussion. I still got a good list of people here. I'm going to take down the speaking time to 1.5 minutes, so I'll happen to have 30 seconds left to wrap up. And I'm also going to, while the next speaker is speaking, take a last round of hands, so this will be your last opportunity to get on the list. I'm going to take a question from Callan in the back. Okay, Nolan.
Yeah, so I just wanted to speak real quickly about, ISO and Burlington's experience with the Occupy movement, because I think what's true for a lot of people, and I know it's true for us, is it's taken the question of Leninist organizing out of the abstract and put it into the real world. How do we work with other movements in reality as opposed to reading about it in a book? And we've had some really, really positive experiences, but we've also had some learning experiences with that. The positive experience has been this idea that we've been able to go into the occupation and have a rotation of comrades in and out, out of the occupation, where folks will go down for 2 or 3 days while other people are taking a break and resting, and then we switch, and that way we're able to maintain a constant presence. And I was actually talking to someone who was originally, I don't know if I would call them hostile to us, but a little bit standoffish, and it was like a day or two before he left for the conference, he was saying, man, what we need is more groups like the ISO who are organized and come into the movement and can maintain a presence, and they see that we've been some of the most involved and most dedicated, and he was pointing out that we have earned a right to have our voices heard. And then just real quickly to talk about the learning experiences, how do you make your voice heard? We had a meeting for starting an occupation at UVM, and we wanted to have a clear line of arguing for the occupation, but we went in a little bit scattered, and we didn't have a clear lead. And what ended up happening was we lost an opportunity where we could have won people over to starting that occupation, but because we weren't completely organized and have a clear lead, that didn't end up happening. And so folks came out of it going, oh, this is what it means to do Leninist organizing and have a clear lead. And so we had a learning experience from that.
Yeah, I just want to go back to your question about, racist signs and such. I think a really good example of a really bad thing that happened was on New York City Slut Walk. There was a sign that someone was holding that said, "Women are the N-word of the world." And it got a lot of media attention, and it had a lot of really negative feedback, obviously. And it just really put a tamper on the whole New York City Slut Walk, because it was a really great experience for a lot of people involved, including myself. So I just think that it's when you see those kinds of things, if for nothing else other than the way that the media will spin it, it's important to get rid of it. And especially even when you're talking to other people, I understand not wanting to be confrontational when you hear sexist and racist and other sort of oppressive comments. But to at least go to that person one-on-one and have a conversation with them about why they made that comment, what it is to kind of get them to your level. Because one of the things that sucks about Occupy is that since everyone is able to speak their mind, and that's a great thing, you're going to have people saying things that are representing the whole movement, even though it's just their opinion. So it's really important to get to those people and try and, change it, even on a one-on-one basis, even though we are trying to change it in a much larger sense. Just as far as media goes, I think that's important.
Just to be really quick, I think just to step back a little bit and just say that we're in the middle of the largest national movement in U.S. history in a number of decades that any of us, most of us, have been involved in this room ever. That's raising questions of class very sharply. The 1% and the 99%. Are you with us or are you with them? So this is no longer like the 5 or 10 people in a room that you've been debating with, shit ideas or good ideas or whatever. This is like a whole new, ball of wax. In the ISO, people know we want revolution. We want the whole ball of wax. We want to transform fundamentally. But we also know that most people in society, including many who are part of this now massive movement, have a lot of ideas that come from the ruling class and mix, a mix of ideas on a ton of different issues. So at the Occupy the Hood rally in that work, there were a bunch of debates. I'm not going to I think what we're saying about the United Front is that massive movements can actually change ideas and consciousness on a massive way, not in the ones and twos, but in a massive way. So in the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, in 1961, there's a poll done that says if you're white and a black person moves into your neighborhood, will you move? 75% say yes. In 1979, the same poll is done. 91% said that they would not move. And that was because of a movement. It didn't just happen, in the ones and twos. And I think the Occupy Wall Street movement has forced everybody to pick a side. It's forced the media to talk about the reality of poverty that nothing has. And it's going to continue to shift people's ideas sharply on those questions. But it's also raising some big questions that are coming up. We're heading into an election year. The Democrats in 2012, now the unions and other movements that we want to be involved in, we're going to have to take up these questions. And what Hadas raised, which is in that context, do you abstain from that question when massive people are moving? Do you shut up, or do you link arms and debate and fight at the same time?
Yeah, I just want to say, in terms of religion, I just want to agree with Curry and Chris said and recommend the book Meek and the Militant by Paul Siegel. I don't know if it's on sale out there, but you should read it. It deals with Marxism and religion. But in terms of the Occupy movement, we're talking about people who are generally waking up after a long, slumber. They've had to deal with the ideas of the ruling class, all the miseducation they received, all this gut-wrenching nationalism and stuff we all have to put up with. So when we deal with people in the movement, we're dealing with people with vast contradictory consciousness, as Antonio Gramsci put it, and we just have to engage with them and hopefully win them over. And in terms of the United Front at Boston, there's now a socialist caucus where we actually are trying to learn together work together with people from different radical traditions. I'm someone who has is able to print out leaflets for free. He's in a different organization. We're going to work with him. We're going to see if we can get an actual organized presence and actually get the word out and hopefully engage in much more large-scale conversations. That's all.
I had someone sitting in this region wearing a black hat. I don't see that anymore. Did they take their hat off? Anyone know their list? Okay, they're done. We're going to go to the black and white sweater right in the middle here.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I go to college, and I just think that this is something that I sort of got as a whole from this whole conference, is that in order to create a united movement and a united front, we need to work on educating the masses, because a lot of people, if you just go up to somebody and tell them, hey, if you're trying to recruit people by telling them that all forms of oppression are linked to capitalism, they're not gonna, frankly, they're not going to understand what you mean. Personally, for me, I didn't know exactly what all that entailed until I came to this conference. I came here to educate myself as someone who didn't affiliate as a socialist or a Marxist before. I have learned more about socialism and Marxism at this conference than I ever have in my entire education. For example, I don't know how many of you went to Leah Penny's talk yesterday on women and oppression, but I think she did a wonderful job of outlining exactly how it is linked to capitalism. And I'm excited because I'm taking a class on the history of women's feminism next semester, and I can't wait to bring my new view on all of this into those essays.
In the back corner here with the green shirt on.
Oh, I didn't have one.
Okay. Was there someone that? No, okay. Then that means our last speaker is Helen.
Well, so there are a couple of questions left. One from Thomas about how do you balance politics with strategy, and another question about is there ever a time when we want to pull out of a movement or of an organizing group? And the first thing I want to say is that there's no handbook. There's no sort of golden answer that you can always apply. We never do that. We always do this. And it's what I think the best expression is the art of politics, right? That it depends on your involvement in the moment. But what Hadas has given us is a lot of principles that we use to evaluate. Does it broaden the movement? Does it forward this particular cause? Does it raise the political consciousness? Does it bring us closer to getting people to the position where they can actually take on the whole system? We've got those principles, and then we've also got an organization. So we can collectively strategize and go in together thinking, this is what we need to be arguing. And then if it works, it's great, and if it doesn't, we come back and we reassess. So those are the two things that we have that give us a huge advantage and assist us in what are really difficult situations that you have to decide on the ground. The second thing I wanted to say is about the question about your experience. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your name, comrade who asked the question about Occupy the Herd, and if people agree with you, why would they want to join our organization? One is for the reason that I just said, but the other one is Joel Geyer's account of his experience in the Berkeley Free Speech movement, where there were, hundreds of thousands of people who agreed with revolutionary socialism, and our little group, our little revolutionary organization, did really well in winning leadership, but they didn't recruit people to build an organization. So when that free speech movement died, as movements do, movements rise and they fall, there was nothing left other than a few people. And so the lesson that he drew from that is you never want to participate in a mass movement and not come out of it with some of the best fighters and the best lessons lessons so that we can go on for the long struggle.
I'm going to hand it back to Hadas to wrap up. I want to, don't everyone storm out as soon as she finishes. There's going to be an important announcement at the very end afterwards. It's a good announcement.
I'm feeling very suspenseful. Okay, so yeah, this has been a great discussion, and I think where Helen ended off is really the thing I really want to emphasize and to draw out of this discussion, which is just the art of politics. And I think, part of what I was saying too about this whole period, the historical context of where the theory of the United Front came out of, people went through tons of different lessons, ups and downs, made mistakes, assessed those mistakes, and it was through the course of that struggle that they learned the art of politics. I think what we're trying to do is make sure that we learn as much of those lessons before a revolutionary period, so that we, make as many mistakes as we need to make, learn the art of politics, and are as effective as possible as mass movements rise up. There is no, handbook exactly for how to do it. I will say, I think that the guiding principle, right, is, and people mention it through the discussion, is that people's ideas develop through struggle. People's consciousness develops as they struggle. You could see it on a level, as Alpana was saying about the civil rights movement. You could see how the ideas in society overall were transformed by the struggle, mass struggle taking hold in front of their eyes. And then even more importantly, it changes the ideas of the participants of that struggle. People getting a sense of their own power, getting a sense of one of the main ideas where we all grow up believing is that just leave it up to the experts to run society. We don't really know what we're doing. When you go down to Occupy Wall Street in New York, and I'm sure there's a similar thing in Boston. I haven't been yet. But you walk around this encampment and you see that there is, a library of, a couple thousand books that's being manned by voluntary, librarians, a medic center, free food, being distributed, tons of political discussion happening everywhere. That that there's this whole debate for a long time about the drumming. I don't know if people heard about that, but tons of drumming that went on, and people couldn't sleep during the encampment, and also it was bothering people that lived around there or whatever. There's this whole big issue, and they figured out together how to, what the solution is, and they limited drumming to 2 hours, from 12 to 2 and from 4 to 6. And it seems like a trivial thing, but it's actually about how that encampment is able to stay there and maintain a relationship with the neighborhood board or whatever. And the reason I say this is that it's one example, but it's people learning through the process of struggle that we can run, we can make decisions democratically, figure things out together. We can, we don't need to leave it up to the experts that things will be mayhem, if there aren't cops patrolling the streets, blah blah blah. They have their own there's security, there's sanitation, all being organized day to day, week to week. That's one example. And so, I don't have anything to say about religion more that's already been said, because I think the question was fully exhausted. But I think that there's an overall question about, how do we relate to people with lots of different political ideas, and to say, people may be coming, maybe starting their union meeting with a Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, or maybe, having a prayer service, which is not nearly as whatever, pledging allegiance to the flag is a whole other thing. People have all sorts of different, come at it from all sorts of different angles. And, the question for us as socialists is how do we engage with people where they're at? That on the one hand, we don't hide our politics. On the other hand, we don't leave altogether just because we don't, agree with this or that thing. So that's the overall method. I'm trying to think if there's any other specific things that haven't been addressed. One thing people should just know is that example in terms of the slut walk slogan, that somebody from our contingent did go up to that person and asked them to remove their sign. Actually had a very comradely discussion with them, because they trying to say something progressive. Quoted John Lennon's song. Not a great song. So anyway, I think that, and that is an example of like how are you going to affect the socialists in a movement? You actually, rather than a decision altogether, you go up to that person and have the argument out, and that's what we can do through the course of the struggle. And in particular, when there's a movement that actually has staying power, like the Occupy movement has right now, you have the opportunity over the course of not just one protest, but over the course of days and weeks and months to be arguing alongside of people, both so that the movement itself gets stronger, but also that, like movements do go up and down, they rise up, they sometimes disappear. What are the lessons that people are going to be left with when the movement ends? Who are the core of activists that are going to be able to take those lessons and bring them into the next movement? That's the responsibility of socialists, to make sure that that core of people is as broad as possible and has as deep as politics, and learn the lessons of those movements as effectively as possible.
Harvard is its pancreas or something. Thanks, great. And so I think that students here are feeling incredibly embattled in a lot of ways. I think obviously it's very significant, and that there is an occupation at Harvard. There are students at Harvard who are actively saying, we both are part of and in solidarity with the 99%. We're part of a larger struggle happening across the U.S. and across the globe. What we want to do is organize a delegation of people to head down there to express solidarity. We want to just meet outside in a few minutes at 4 o'clock, right? So outside the registration table, there's a double set of glass doors and steps. We just want to meet on those steps for anybody that wants to go down. We just want to talk for a few minutes beforehand. The Harvard University Police has been obviously very closely following our conference. both via walkie-talkie, but also they've been here as well. So I think we want to have a very clear plan as to what we're doing, but I also think that we absolutely want to show everyone in the movement that we're part of here at Harvard that the ISO is absolutely tolerant